Have you ever loved someone so much that you forgot about yourself? What does it feel like when you betray that person, and the price you pay is a pain that cannot be forgotten? The story between Rakan and Lira is not just a love affair, but a tragedy of choices and regrets. Can love heal the wounds, or does it only make everything more profound? Back then, Rakan was still a young man, newly enlisted in the military, undergoing training at a military camp. During those days, he was not the powerful general he is now. He was just a young warrior, dreaming of one day protecting the weak and bringing peace to the world. Amidst the harsh training sessions, there was one figure who always appeared beside him, the human girl he loved. She was an ordinary girl, nothing particularly remarkable except for her clear eyes and radiant smile. They met by chance when she came to the camp to visit a friend. Rakan, who already felt lost in the cold world of the military, found himself instantly drawn to her. What started as casual chit-chat slowly turned into long conversations. Rakan felt as though this girl was the warm fire amidst the coldness of military life. Despite the harshness of military work, he always kept his promise to return and meet her whenever he could. After long training sessions and sleepless nights worrying about upcoming missions, he found comfort in the letters she wrote, in her sweet messages filled with hope for a bright future. She always believed in him, reminded him not to give up on his dreams, and, most importantly, always waited for him, no matter how far away he was. But life wasn't that simple. For a soldier, sacrifice was inevitable. Rakan soon realized that his military work was not just about defending the country, but also entailed many other responsibilities and challenges. Long trips and continuous missions gradually caused him to drift away from the girl. Even though he knew she was still waiting, he could no longer contact her as frequently as before. Gradually, this distance became an insurmountable gap. The girl patiently waited, sending loving letters and hopeful messages. But each time she sent them, the response was silence. Rakan wasn't a bad person, but he wasn't perfect either. Over time, he became overwhelmed by his military duties, mental exhaustion, and new social relationships. He began meeting new friends, new comrades, including a powerful female general, Katerina, whom he couldn't help but notice. Katerina was a proud and decisive general with incredible strength. She was a woman who was not only beautiful but also extremely powerful. During battles and tense missions, Katerina was always the one leading the army to victory. Rakan began to feel an attraction to her, not just because of her appearance but also because of her confidence and strength. At first, he thought it was just ordinary admiration. But gradually, through the times they had to work together, strategize, and face life-and-death situations, his feelings for Katerina began to change. This general was unlike the innocent and weak human girl he had once loved. Katerina was a pragmatic, strong, and ambitious woman. More importantly, she could offer him the things he had always lacked in military life: recognition and respect. Rakan wasn't an easy person to win over, but gradually, he became drawn to Katerina's feelings. She knew how to understand him, to recognize his weaknesses he couldn't even see in himself. This general slowly became someone he couldn't pull away from. They began to form an intimate relationship, meeting outside of work hours. Their conversations were filled with passion and mutual understanding. One day, after a battle ended and Katerina had fully captured Rakan's heart, she made a request. She demanded that Rakan completely cut off all contact with the human girl. Katerina would not accept the existence of any past relationships of Rakan's because she believed that a soldier must belong entirely to the military, must be fully loyal to her, and could not share emotions or thoughts with anyone else. At that moment, Rakan felt conflicted. He had loved the girl for 5 years, and even though he knew the distance between them was growing, he still could not entirely let go of his feelings. But Katerina would not accept any sharing of loyalty. She didn't believe in long-distance love. She only believed in strength, decisiveness, and the absolute nature of love. For Katerina, she could not tolerate any weakness. Rakan felt pain, but he couldn't refuse Katerina's request. He felt as though he was being torn between two worlds. One was the pure, warm love he shared with the human girl, and the other was the power and authority that Katerina represented. His mind was spinning, but in the end, he decided to sever all ties with the girl he had loved for so many years. Throughout this process, even though he knew the human girl would suffer, Rakan couldn't change his decision. He felt guilty, tormented, but could not betray Katerina's choice. And so, Rakan's 5-year-long love affair with the human girl ended in silence, with no words of farewell. The girl, named Lira, was unaware of Rakan's silent decisions. Every day, she patiently waited for news from him. Each letter and message she sent was filled with hope, but not a single reply came. On the long nights, she lay awake, wondering if he was facing difficulties, or if he had simply forgotten her. Her love for him remained as strong as it had been in the beginning, but his silence tormented her mind day after day. Lira began to feel a vague sorrow, a sense of loss that she couldn't understand. Every time she stood in front of the house where they had once dreamed of a happy future together, the pain became more tangible. She couldn't accept that he would leave her waiting in vain. Their relationship couldn't end like this. It couldn't be lost simply because of silence, losing all the sweet memories they had shared. She couldn't just sit still and wait any longer. Lira decided to find Rakan, even if she had to face the most painful truths. She needed an explanation from him, a clear answer to the changes in him, to the love that had disappeared in a way she couldn't comprehend. She went to places where he used to appear, seeking out his old friends, but no one could give her any clear answers. Finally, she heard that Rakan was with General Katerina, and she was leading a new campaign. Lira had no other choice. She decided to go to the military camp and confront Rakan directly about the reason behind his transformation. When Lira entered the military compound, the soldiers looked at her with confused eyes. She wasn't a soldier, and no one could understand her decision to come here alone, among armed soldiers. However, Lira didn't care about their gazes. She had only one goal: to meet Rakan and hear him explain. When she arrived at the place where Rakan stood with Katerina, her heart twisted. Rakan stood there, looking up at her, but his eyes were no longer the eyes of the man who had once loved her. His gaze was empty, cold, and distant. Katerina stood next to him, her proud expression showing no care for Lira's presence. Lira could no longer contain her emotions. She stepped forward and looked Rakan straight in the eye, her voice trembling. "Why did you do this to me? You promised you'd come back, that you wouldn't abandon me. Have you forgotten everything we've been through?" Rakan didn't answer immediately. He looked at Lira with a guilty expression, but the silence stretched on like a wound that wouldn't heal. Katerina, standing beside him, sighed as if she was used to such scenes. She stepped forward, her voice cold and full of arrogance. "Girl, he's no longer yours. He is mine. He has chosen the path of strength and victory. If you want him, that's between you and me." Lira looked at Katerina, her face full of anger. But what pained her more was Rakan's silence. He said nothing, didn't stand up to defend her. He simply stood there, like a man who had completely belonged to someone else. Even if his heart ached, even if he wanted to speak, in front of Katerina, he dared not. The humiliation Lira felt didn't just come from Katerina's words, but from Rakan's indifference. She had come here full of hope, expecting an explanation, but instead, she received nothing but a chilling silence from the man she loved most. It felt like the whole world had crumbled in that moment. She turned and walked away, unable to bear it any longer. Lira didn't stop there. She knew she needed to make it clear to Rakan that this silence was unforgivable. She didn't want to live in a relationship where only one side was sacrificing, only one side was loving. But she couldn't deny that something had changed in Rakan's heart. He was no longer the young man who dreamed of love and happiness. He had chosen the path of power and strength, and perhaps her love for him was no longer enough to change that. Despite the anger and pain overwhelming her, Lira couldn't forget the last image of Rakan, the one she had once thought would walk through life with her. Now all that was left was emptiness and despair. She couldn't forget, but she also couldn't go back. After that day, Lira no longer had the strength to face the world around her. She returned to the old house, the place that had once been filled with sweet memories between her and Rockin. But now, everything was left in emptiness. The walls seemed to haunt her, as if whispering words of condemnation and mockery. She had waited for too long, trusted too much, only to be betrayed in the most brutal way. The love she had for him was nothing more than a beautiful dream, now buried under the shadow of betrayal. She couldn't accept this truth. Her heart could no longer beat, could no longer live, when the one she loved most no longer recognized her. Lira felt like a shadow, devoid of life, without any reason to continue existing in this world. Each step she took within the house felt like she was lost in a maze with no way out. No one could understand her pain. No one could feel the emptiness that enveloped her soul. At night, as darkness descended, Lira sat down at the old table, her hand clutching a photo of Rockin. She gazed into his eyes in the picture, trying to find something, but all she saw was coldness, distance in his gaze. She no longer recognized the man in that photo. He had changed too much. The pain was too great, and Lira felt she could no longer endure. She didn't want to continue living in a world without him, didn't want to face a reality where no one loved her. She walked to a dark corner of the house, where she had once wondered if there would ever be a day when she would leave like this. Now that moment had come. With a broken heart, Lira decided to hang herself. She took a rope, tied it to a beam, and slowly stepped forward. Her eyes closed, her heart stopped, and a wave of darkness swept through her body. As she collapsed, a faint light suddenly appeared, reaching out from the darkness, as if someone was calling her to another place. However, her death was not an end. Lira did not depart as a peaceful soul. She became a ghost, a spirit full of vengeance. Her ghost began to wander in the darkness of the house, and before long, her vengeance spread to the entire army that Rockin had once served. On long nights, while the soldiers slept soundly, sighs and footsteps with no clear source echoed through the camp. At first, they were just strange sounds, but soon they became more distinct, as if someone was walking around, watching every step they took. Faint, shadowy figures appeared and disappeared, and every time the ghostly presence appeared, the soldiers could feel the chill and the fear spreading. Rockin was the first to notice the strange changes within the army. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, but gradually he began to notice undeniable signs. One night, while he was standing guard, a cold voice rang out from behind him, causing him to turn around in shock. It was a familiar voice, but filled with pain, with rage. "Lira?" he whispered, as if trying to confirm something that he couldn't even believe himself. But no one was there, only the darkness and the cold wind. The feeling of being watched grew stronger and stronger. Rockin knew he was being haunted by Lira's ghost. She had returned, not as a loving spirit, but as a vengeful one. Every night, her presence became clearer, and he could no longer sleep peacefully, unable to escape the sense of threat. Whenever Lira's ghost appeared, the soldiers in the camp would fall into panic. They saw terrifying images, cold hands reaching out from the darkness, whispers pulling them into the abyss. Rockin began to realize that Lira's vengeance was not only aimed at him, but also at the army he had once fought for. She wanted them to pay for everything she had suffered. Rockin's obsession deepened more than ever. Every time he saw Lira's ghost, the regret in his heart flared up violently. He felt like the one who had driven her to death, and now he had to live in the torment he had created. The spirits of the soldiers soon began to appear, led by Lira, cursed by her, and in the end, no one in the army could escape her vengeance. Only Rockin was left, standing among the ruins of memories, of unfulfilled promises, of a love that had died. The sighs in the night, the ghostly images, all led him to an inevitable end that could never be undone. With regret filling his mind, Rockin could only collapse, unable to do anything to undo what had been lost. Love, betrayal, and Lira's death had taken everything he had. The long, sleepless nights continued to stretch on, each night like a battle within Rockin. The guilt and Lira's haunting presence would not let him go. Her ghost seemed to have become a part of the darkness around him, wrapping him in endless nightmares with no escape. The army he had once fought alongside, his comrades and friends, were now nothing but faint images of the past. Everything around him had turned into a dead land, a place filled with pain and regret. Rakan knew he could no longer run away from what had happened. Lira, with her tragic death, had become an inescapable force. Every time he tried to forget, her memory would emerge more vividly, haunting him relentlessly. The love he had once felt for her was now just a deep wound in his heart. Every word she spoke, every warm embrace was now nothing but scars that would never heal. Day by day, in his desperate loneliness, Rakan began to realize one thing. He could not live without doing something. He had to face what he had caused. He couldn't continue living in the darkness, and he could not allow the torment of regret to consume him. But he didn't know where to start or how to begin to atone for the great mistake he had made. One day, as the army prepared for a new battle, Rakan stood in the middle of the battlefield, looking at the warriors around him. Everyone was eager, preparing for a brutal fight. But for him, this battle no longer held any meaning. In his heart, there was only one big question. Is it possible to find a glimmer of hope amidst all this pain? Could he undo Lira's death? Or was it all just an endless loop with no way out? On an evening before the battle, when no one was awake, Rakan decided to seek out the traces of Lira. He recalled the places she had been, the memories they shared, the smiles, and the happy moments that had been swallowed by darkness. He set off, ignoring the warnings from the generals. He knew that only by facing the past could he find a way to escape it. With a heavy heart, Rakan walked into the dark forest where he and Lira had once spent warm afternoons together. Everything now felt unfamiliar. The gloomy forest no longer offered peace. Instead, the dry wind rustled through withered branches, like whispers from souls left behind. In the dim light, Rakan walked, once again following the traces of Lira. Each step seemed to take him further into the past, into sweet moments now transformed into nightmares. He stopped by a large old tree, where he had sat with her under its shade, discussing the future, the dreams that would never come true. It was where he felt closest to her. Now there was only the eerie silence. He knelt, placing his hand on the ground, filled with deep regret. "Can you forgive me, Lira? Is there any chance for me to fix what I've done?" Rakan whispered, as if seeking redemption in those words. But the answer remained silent, nothing but the chill of the ghostly presence in the forest. He stood up and looked around. Lira was no longer here. Everything had ended. The sense of hopelessness and despair flooded over him, and he realized there was no way to fix what had happened. Her death was unchangeable, and his regret could never bring her back to life. When the battle began, Rakan no longer fought for glory or for the service of the army. He fought for only one reason: to free himself. Every swing of the sword, every step he took, carried with it an unanswered question. But there was no way to go back, no way to fix it. His comrades around him fought with all their strength, but Rakan knew he was fighting with himself. The battle raged on through the night, and as the first light of dawn broke, only Rakan remained standing amidst the ruins. The soldiers were gone, his comrades had fallen. He stood there, his eyes lost in the void, unsure whether he was still alive or had long since died. Finally, in the silence, a figure passed by. It was Lira, but not as a living person. She appeared before him, smiling gently as she once did when they were together. She did not speak, only looked at him with eyes full of forgiveness and sorrow. Rakan bowed his head, tears streaming down. "You forgave me, Lira, but I cannot forgive myself." Once again she smiled, and then her ghost slowly faded away into the space, leaving Rakan alone in the stillness of the battlefield. He knew that no matter what he did, the price of betrayal and regret would always remain with him, never disappearing. And so, the end of a love story came to a tragic close, with no chance for redemption, only painful memories and the acceptance that sometimes, love cannot save fate. We always think that if we love truly, everything will turn out well. But perhaps, sometimes love is not enough to hold on to what has been lost. Rockin couldn't save his relationship, and the price he paid was an unrelenting pain. Love is not always the miracle cure. So what do you think? Could Rockin have done something to change his fate? What is the greatest regret in this story? Don't forget to like and subscribe to watch more captivating stories and valuable lessons about love and life. What would you choose if you were in Rockin's place? Share your thoughts below this video.